Buenos días, good morning, everyone. Bienvenidos, welcome to Conexiones. Usted puede escuchar en español marcando la opción de español en Zoom. Para instrucciones de cómo hacer esto, favor de ver el programa. We have live interpretation. Simply select Spanish in the Zoom feature. Please check the event program for more information on how to do this. For those who celebrate today, Feliz Dia de los Muertos. I hope you're enjoying your altares and your time with your familia this morning con un cafecito, with some coffee. My name is Mirna Loreli Cibrian. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I'm the program officer of the Latino Partnership Program at Oregon Community Foundation, where I have the great pleasure to serve alongside LPP's coordinator, Rocio Perez, and our regional coordinators, Susie Garcia in Southern Oregon and Veliz Sandoval in Central Oregon. Please visit our website to learn more about the Latino Partnership Program. Yesterday was our first day of Conexiones, and it was filled with stories, a lot of information, and opportunities to ask questions. Thank you for joining us once again. Today is our last day together, where we will continue to have another opportunity to engage in conversations, and this time on the topic of education. But before we begin, please let us start with a land acknowledgement. This land acknowledgement is an effort to recognize, respect, and create awareness of the history that has led to this moment. Indigenous peoples have long held the land itself in great reverence. Utilizing these long-standing traditions, we would like to acknowledge the land upon which we currently stand, the land which unites us and reminds us that we are all Oregonians working in partnership to create a better future for all of our communities. Working in partnership to create a better future for all of our communities is something we need to do. This land has created a vibrant and loving home for us, and we give thanks to the tribes who have been its stewards since the beginning of time. While we're grateful for our ability to reside in this beautiful state, we acknowledge that we must still work toward the essential justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and co-liberation that will help our state thrive, one that will truly feel like home to all who inhabit here. We would like to acknowledge all Indigenous people of the lands and of the lands encompassed by the current state of Oregon, as we know it today, including our 9 federally recognized tribes and our urban Indigenous populations. We honor and thank both the ancestors and the descendants of these tribes, as well as our community partners here today for sharing our vision for a better Oregon. In your packet, you will find resources on how to support tribal communities. We hope you find them helpful. Gracias, everyone, for listening. And now I'd like to share a few logistics with you. All participants are on listen-only mode, except in breakout sessions. You may share feedback or ask questions in a couple of ways. If you're on a computer, please use the chat or Q&A feature to submit your questions. Please indicate if you would like to use your questions in an anonymous way. Please be advised, today's summit is being recorded. If you have any objections, please disconnect at this time. And as a reminder, we have live interpretation. Simply select Spanish in the Zoom feature below. Recuerden que usted puede escuchar en español marcando la opción de Zoom en español. Para instrucciones de cómo hacer eso, favor de ver el programa. And now, I would like to introduce Wendy Veliz, the chair of the Latino Partnership Program Statewide Advisory Council. Welcome, Wendy.
Buenos dias. Thank you, Mirna. As Mirna said, I'm Wendy Veliz. I serve as the Latino Partnership Program Statewide Council Chair alongside 7 other incredible volunteer leaders. Me da mucho gusto to be here today. I'm so happy to be here today with all of you. Thank you muchas gracias for joining this summit. With today's focus on education, I'm particularly excited. I have 3 siblings that are school teachers, and so education is very important in the family. One of the things that I thought would be really inspiring is if we could highlight a few students and what education means to them. And we have some students that we're going to hear from in a little bit. But first, I'd like to share a little story about myself. And I heard some powerful stories yesterday, and I was humbled by them. So my siblings and I worked alongside my grandparents in the fields. We didn't know we were farm workers. We only knew that we were working to help the family. That's what you did. And there's a lot of things that I remember. And because of Dia de los Muertos, I thought it was very appropriate today to remember them and remember some of the things that happened during those summers that shaped who I am today, and things that I carry with me, that I carry of them within me. So I remember watching my grandmother get up early in the morning and make homemade tortillas, and then get home in the late afternoon and evening and make homemade tortillas. I remember early mornings and long days. I remember being sore, and I remember being tired. I remember laughing when we sit on the dirt ground and eat our lunch in the fields. I remember working in the garden with my grandfather and him teaching me how to grow a garden. I learned from them hard work, humility, compassion, determination, and the importance of familia, all of which I've carried with me every single day. So today I thank my grandparents, who I hope are smiling from heaven, and the role they played in who I am. They helped me develop skills that guided me and helped me persevere in obtaining my own education and creating a brighter path for my children, and maybe one day for my grandchildren, and for generations to follow. And with that, I'm now excited to be joined by three wonderful students who are bright and thankful that they are here to share what education means to them. And the first student we have is Audrey, and Audrey is from the West Lynn Wilsonville School District. Bienvenidas, Audrey.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Audrey Buck. I'm a freshman in the Wilsonville West Lynn School District. And I'm very excited that today's focus is on education, because my education is very important to me. I come from a family of farm workers who dreamed for their children and grandchildren to have an access to an education, and I'm here because of their hard work. To me, my education is a way of unlocking the endless possibilities that the world has to offer. It can teach me to make advancements in technology, medicine, literature, or any other field I may go into. Focusing on my education allows me to create opportunities for future generations. When I was younger, my education let me read and learn about faraway places and cultures. Now, my education can give me the path to immersing myself in them. Being a Latina student is deeply humbling because it allows me to share my own heritage and culture with others. Talking with other students about my heritage brings me both pride and humility. Pride in the sense of how proud I am of not only my beautiful culture, but of my background and how hard my family fought for me to be able to choose what I want to do in my life. This also deeply humbles me and makes me appreciate my access to education even more. I also feel humbled at how others share their own cultures with me. This is another reason why education is so important. It brings a sense of community and of purpose. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you, Audrey. Have a great day at school. Gracias. With that, I'd like to introduce to you Grace, who is from the Salem Kaiser School District. Welcome, Grace.
Thank you for having me. My name is Grace, as introduced. I go to McKay High School. So I had a pretty rocky start at the very beginning of my education at elementary school. I have to retake a lot of my standardized tests like every single year because I couldn't even make the threshold to pass. I even remember that there was this program called TAG, which stands for Talented and Gifted, and I was just so crushed that I couldn't make it. And at that point, education was really an obstacle for me. It wasn't really much of a learning experience. I was always having to stay after or join intensive classes to get extra support. But when I entered high school, I realized that education is probably one of the most valuable opportunities I have been given. I mean, it was still a struggle. It was still repetitive, and it could be systematic. And, you know, high school education is very competitive once you start getting into your junior and senior year. You know, it's all about taking how many AP classes you are in or getting A's and seeing who has the most number of extracurriculars. All that while you're being tasked with trying to figure out who you are and what you want to do after high school or where you want to be after high school. And I say that right now, education for me is a little bit scary. And I say this with perfect timing because this is college application month. So you can just feel the stress. And I know that in a matter of years, I'll probably be maybe even thousands of dollars in debt from college. And I know that I'll have to do 4+ years of college because a bachelor's degree isn't worth as much as it used to be. And I know that when I enter college, I might even feel kind of small and maybe even inadequate compared to my peers. I even remember I visited the USC campus this summer, and they had a 3-story gift shop, and I was just like, this is too big for me. 44,000 kids, this is too much. But I want to go in a career that involves government and education and social work. And to do any of those, I have to go to college. I have to get my education. And for me, that's really how I've overcome the barrier that school once was for me, because I've found motivation and purpose for being in class 7 hours a day and taking rigorous courses. Education for me has definitely given me direction. It has given me friends. It's given me time away from my family for at least 8 hours a day. And it's given me options for life. And to me, education is really everything. Once again, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Grace. Powerful words from both Audrey and Grace. With that, I'd like to introduce Diana, who is from the David Douglas School District, and she's going to share briefly what education means to her, as well as introduce our keynote speaker. Welcome, Diana.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Diana Elizabeth. My pronouns are she and they. I'm 11 years old, and I go to David Douglas School District. I'm very happy to be here today to share about what education means to me. First, I think education can be something that people do at any age. In my opinion, there are many different ways to learn a lot of things. Education helps us get the jobs we want so that we can take care of ourselves and our families. Education really helps everyone to make sure they have what they need. Education also helps learn about things we need to in life, like math. And math is really important for everything, even for cooking. I'm really excited I have the chance to go to school because it's going to help me become a veterinarian one day. I hope it helps every student reach their dreams. And now, thank you for listening to me. I've never done this before, and this was really fun. A special thank you to all the kind teachers that help students, especially to my teachers. Now I'm excited to welcome Carmen Urbina, Deputy Director at Oregon Department of Education. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Diana Elizabeth, lindo nombre. Buenos días, good morning, everybody. I am humbled and so joyful this morning to be with all of you today, specifically, again, for those that celebrate Dia de los Muertos today. Takes a special day, I think, for our members of our community. So with that, I am going to be sharing my screen. And of course, 1 second, please. Apologize for that. You know, you would think about 2 years doing this that we would get better at this. Okay. So if I can just get a confirmation that you're seeing my screen.
Yes, we can see it, Carmen.
Beautiful, beautiful. So again, everybody take a deep breath. Muchísimas gracias. Nuevamente es un placer. It's a pleasure and it's a humbling experience to be here with all of you today. You know, I was thinking about the theme of La Cumbre, and thinking about conexiones, connections, coming in community, leaning in and being together. The title of my presentation is El Movimiento, El Presente, El Futuro, que significa nuestros niños. The movement, the present, the future, which equals, you know, our children. And what does that look like, sound like, and feel like in real time today? So what I'm going to share with you is kind of a journey around what's meaningful, what centers us, what makes our heart and spirit sing in the skin that we're in, as myself, as a brown Latina indigenous immigrant woman. And the journey around what is happening at the Oregon Department of Education through the lens of equity, racial equity, and anti-racism. And then what's in our future and how do we stand together? So as we start, I have to bring, you know, she hero Dolores Huerta. And I love this picture of her. And she asked some essential questions decades ago, and by the way, continues in her 90s to ask essential questions of all of us. But this one, I remember reading her autobiography and saying, how do I stop 11 million people from buying the grape? El movimiento. How do I stop 11 million people from buying the grape? That right there, we translate that to 2021 and bring some essential questions for all of us como comunidad, as leaders. You know, how do we lean into this question? So I'm going to leave that in your parking lot as we move forward. And as it was shared, our stories are so important. As you can tell, that little girl is me. And that picture was taken actually months before my mom and dad, we came to the United States, first landed in LA and then landed in New York, and we were undocumented. The story, fast forward, and some of you might have heard this story, but again, I feel that I'm sharing this story with humbleness. I'm sharing this story because we are what our elders and our parents and our grandparents provided us the conditions to move forward. So we moved to the United States again, and I was placed in kindergarten special education class because I did not know how to speak the language. That lasted for a couple of years, and there was a teacher that then said, I don't think she belongs in this class. Fast forward, 5th grade, I remember my beautiful blonde, blue-eyed teacher, Miss Hope Gardell, will never forget her, and how she encouraged this beautiful, long braids, you know, chubby, cutie little thing, to excel, to think, to wonder, to do math. Diana, I agree with you. Math is amazing. And I also remember La Migra coming to my school, and I remember Miss Hope Gardell fighting, because at that time it was the 70s, folks. You know, I'm 56 years old. That's what happened. And my mom, Veliz, she finished 3rd grade. My dad, Roberto Urbina, he finished 5th grade. My mom worked at maquiladoras in the sweatshops in New York, and my dad worked in a paper mill. And I remember my mom, talking about Dia de los Muertos, celebrating and remembering. I'm remembering her. And that's why I'm sharing this picture with you. When she passed away from Alzheimer's, you know, her hands were filled with arthritis, because when we went back to Honduras, they did everything possible for my education. And I remember my mom sitting me down and having me read La Prensa, the newspaper, and then she would dictate. And every word that I would get wrong, she would ask me to write it 50 times. I hated it. And I'm so blessed that my mom did that for me. And that's what she could do. And my dad, actually in December 11th, is going to be his 1-year anniversary. And I'm holding space for every single person that's here today that lost a loved one to COVID. My dad died of COVID at 89 years old, and we were hoping to celebrate his 90, which would have been this September. So his anniversary is December 11th. So I'm honoring Roberto Urbina, my beautiful and amazing dad. Our stories are important. They're filled with love. They're filled with lucha. They're filled with corazón and espíritu. And more so than ever, we as comunidad, as part of el movimiento that Dolores Huerta talks about, we have to share our stories with our children. We have to. It's not an option not to. As sometimes painful they might be, they're full of espíritu. They're full of who we are as a community. So I wanted to share these two pictures and my story, because also statistically, I am not supposed to be the deputy director of the Oregon Department of Education. And I always say this with such humbleness, because every single day I wake up, I know I say, thank you. I pray. And see, I'm going to start crying. I'm a crier. Very proud of that, by the way, because, you know, you often think, who am I, right? But yes, I am proud to be the deputy director, but all statistics say that I shouldn't be. Because after we were deported, I studied hard. My mom and dad said, study, study, study. And I got a full-ride scholarship to come back to Oregon State University for my degree, and the rest is history. Here I am 30 years later. So I'm celebrating and honoring my parents for that gift that they gave me. Also, I want to talk about, you know, in the time of the clock of the world that we're currently in, when we're experiencing times of extremes, we have our systems working for equity, racial equity, anti-racism. We are also at the same time dealing with racial divide, racism, political division. In Oregon, if you are out there and you dealt with fires last year, my heart goes out to you. And then the social unrest that's happening that becomes so absolutely confusing. And then we have this shared responsibility. And then responsibility, I'm always defining it as the ability that we have to respond, meaning that we have a choice to do or not to do, to say or not to say. And it becomes an interesting balance in these times of extremes as we're trying, in the skin that I am in as a Latina Indigenous woman, holding space for the racism and becoming exhausted. I'm just going to say it's not easy to be us, and as our Latino, Latina, Latinx community, and el movimiento, right? El movimiento, the familia, and that's what keeps us centered, and that's what keeps us alive, and that's what keeps our spirit saying, sí se puede, right? Y sí podemos. I also have to bring AOC, Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez, that said beautifully, there's so much fear and hate, and we must negate it with active, courageous love. How do we move forward in el movimiento, whatever that means for you, right? Whatever your context is. Never forget, number one, our indigenous grounding of where we come from, who we come from, and that courageous love, because love is not easy, folks. Love is not easy. And how do we activate that in every step of the way, how we show up as our stance and our armor. So I love this quote. AOC, my hero. I also wanted to share with all of you that in the now, you know, as leaders of our community-based organizations, as community members leading conversations, as philanthropy, as educators, you know, what's the journey that we need to do in order to develop equity in education? And I love this paradigm because it says we must develop leaders who can transform our institutions by eliminating inequitable practices and cultivate the unique gifts, talents, and interests of every child. Speaking Spanish, speaking Mon, speaking Quiche, that's an asset. It's not a deficit. So that success and failure are no longer predictable by students' identity, racial, cultural, economic, or any other social factor. And I want to share with you, Sharon, the last part. She says, those who practice leadership for equity must confront, disappoint, and dismantle, and at the same time, energize, inspire, and empower. I have this slide in my office as a poster and as a gentle reminder of how to show up, because our work is beautiful, amazing, a gift, and challenging. But I have to say that in the now, how do we practice leadership for equity? And how do we confront and disappoint and dismantle? Because we are within a system, right? And we press the system and we're trying to dismantle a system that was not created to serve children that look like me and children that look like Diana and our beautiful youth that spoke today. So as we move forward, there's several essential questions, and we all know that there's nothing more powerful than the gift of the right question. In thinking about what is ahead of us, 3 essential questions are held among all of us leaders and offer ways to frame being in the right relationship with our communities, our students, and one another, to think about equity in deep and enduring ways, and to plan for our present in ways to reflect our students' strengths and needs. I know that the Oregon Department of Education, these are some of the essential questions that we're asking ourselves. What does it look like to truly develop equitable education from the place of abundance rather than scarcity, from a place of beauty other than you don't belong, from a space of being, right? How can leaders take what they've learned from this last year, such as the importance of partnering closely with families and communities to build a more empowering and equitable educational future? And how do we intentionally, what we invest in is what we value, right? The distribution of those resources, our schools, to reflect that disproportionate impact of COVID-19 and students and communities. And how do we do that, holding space for the challenges that we have? I'm going to share something with all of you that we're seeing specifically around our racial divide that becomes very confusing and challenging in the skins that I know I am in, and that many of you are in this Conexiones Summit. Because there's a movement out there that we can talk about cultural identity development, that we can talk about Dia de los Muertos, that we can talk about what's meaningful for our students to be able to be and learn about who we are as a people, as part of this nation. And at the same time, I had the blessing to participate in a conversation in Washington, D.C. with other Latino, Latina, Latinx leaders. And what's happening is that more than ever, el movimiento we need to be leaning in together, because and if we have educators, there's records requests, there's folks fishing for information that they might find. They're trying to demonize our leaders. And how do we stay strong in that? It's going to be part of a community effort. How recently, I'm going to say it, Proud Boys are targeting one of our Latina leaders because she believes in equity. She believes in anti-racism. They're targeting her home. And this is happening across our state. And el movimiento, si se puede. Bring it on. Right? And how do we hold space for some of the essential questions, specifically in the now in Oregon? Our responsibility at the Oregon Department of Education is to 560,907 beautiful and amazing students, where we are speaking, I'm going to move this, 200 languages, where 40% of our students, 40% of our students are BIPOC, Indigenous, and tribal students. As leaders in schools and districts across Oregon, this is information that is helpful to set a larger purpose and context for our schools and students. Most importantly, the larger context helps us to ground our work in values of anti-racist leadership, working toward educational equity. Why are we doing anti-racist work? Because we are the stewards of education, and 40% of our students are BIPOC and tribal students. And equity and racial equity and anti-racism benefits every single one and 100% of our students. We have the power to make school places that are safe, welcoming, and inclusive to each student, making the places where every student belongs. Again, 40% of our students, 18% are English language learners, 12.6 identify as LGBTQ2 SIA+, and 14.2 are students who have disabilities. This is our charge as educators, holding the space for our beautiful community, diverse, beautiful, different, alike. How do we create the conditions for Diana Elizabeth to be, right, to accomplish her dreams? I call that blessed work. Sorry about that. So as we go forward, we are defining, and we know that equity is a word that has been demonized. And I want to offer you this, there's many definitions, but I want to offer those because, you know, as I see ourselves, myself in the skin that I'm in and the role that I play, the experiences that I have, my responsibility to community, my relationship, right, to the students and the communities that I humbly serve. Equity is a lens that allows us to see who are the families and students we're not serving, and a mirror back that is a reflection back to our system, right? And the D1 did too. I don't want to talk about the dropouts. I want to talk about the pushouts. Right there and then, we change it. Dropping out, we put the responsibility on the student and the family and the community. I want to talk about D2. I want to talk about the pushouts. Why are children being pushed out of our system? Because then it is our relationship, our community, our system that needs to change. And what are we not doing? That's what that question brings. Unintentional impact. Who's harmed and who benefits? Who's invited to the table? And do we create the spaces for all voices to be heard? Again, responsibility, ability that we have to respond, and conditions that we need to create. That's part of my responsibility with an equity lens. What are the conditions that I need to create for students to be successful, to be able to show up in beautiful and amazing ways? The ODE equity stands, I'm not going to read it, but it's basically, we are in charge of policy, practices, procedures, and legislations. We must apply an equity and racial equity lens, because our charge then becomes, this means the restructuring, the dismantling of systems and institutions that create the current dichotomy of who benefits, who's oppressed, and who is marginalized. And I love what Mirna said earlier, the path to liberation, right? What does that look like when we look at, Equality is, it's okay, you know, equity, inclusion, but we want to be able to lean into that liberation. What does that look like for our students and communities? I also must say that at ODE right now, we have a charge to innovate. I have to bring the voice of Colt Gill, my director, because education must innovate forward. The work needs to be purposeful. The relationships between school and students must be seen as intentional, and the content itself must be engaging. Colt Gill, our director Gill, is consistently reminding us what is our North Star, and we need to stop trying to fix what we have and create what our communities, families, and children, our babies deserve. And what does that look like in leaning in with courage, unapologetic courage? And what does that sound like and look like in real time for us, specifically in the skin that we're in, you know, as BIPOC and tribal communities? Also, our lens is anti-racist, and we are creating anti-racist policy. And the highlight that I want to be able to elevate is that there's no such thing as a non-racist or race-neutral policy. I am going to say that again. There's no such thing as a non-racist or a race-neutral policy. So we have to, in our system, be able to look at every single policy and guidance and how we speak, the words that we say, so we don't cause harm. And I can tell you, we're trying. Oregon Department of Education and trying. We're not perfect and we're not there. But also part of our journey, and I'm going to skip this slide, is that we have said every part of the system needs to have a strategic plan. And we used to have two, an equity strategic plan and the Oregon Department of Education plan. We basically move the strategic plan away and say, our equity strategic plan is our plan. This is the work that we need to be doing. Create new patterns and build structural capacity for educational equity in our agency, so everything that we do has that lens and that intention. The framework that we use is inside our work. Who are you in the skin that you're in, and how are we responsible? How do we make sense of our cultural identity? Alignment of language and understanding, and the impact, you know, and systems change. Also, that our model is a distributed equity embedded throughout the system. What does this mean? To usher change, we must acknowledge the deeper levels of institutional and structural racism that exist within the government and education system, then live in the comfort of talking about race in order to progress towards productive discourse and advance racially just and equitable Oregon. That discomfort about talking about race must be a stance, because there's two things. And when I work with, you know, our white colleagues is, are you feeling uncomfortable or are you feeling unsafe? Our children are feeling unsafe. There's two very different things. And how do we move this in the, you know, with a racial equity, with an anti-racist lens? And so I just wanted to share with all of you how we're looking at equity. And our strategic plan, again, these are 4 of the key pillars, and they go deep in transforming our system and making those systems change that we need to be able to do. Also, understanding that equity, racial equity, and anti-racist policies benefits every single one of our students. And ODE is proud to produce equity-minded legislation and to have worked with many partners to make these policies a reality. While we still have much to do for all our students, these bills are a step in the right direction. Again, this is our stance. I'm not going to review it, but I just want to, as we're moving to this part of the journey together that I've delineated, I want to highlight a few of the work that is currently happening now. This is being the tribal history, shared history, ethnic studies, the Holocaust and genocide, inclusive education, right? There's civil rights and program areas that I'm not going to review with all of you. And then these are examples of anti-racist policy and program efforts across our agency that are currently happening in real time. Equitable CTE programs. We have equitable distribution of funding. We're analyzing data justice lenses, high quality inclusion for students with disabilities. We're looking at internal learning and equity teams, support for bilingual students, restructuring completely what our emergent bilingual students deserve. You know, cultural responsive suicide prevention, integrated model of mental health that includes the ability and the lens, what is the impacts of racial microaggressions on our children, insults, assaults, and invalidations that are happening every single day that produce racial battle fatigue in our children. Racial battle fatigue, PTSD, because of racism. Also, that our agency, again, is embedding this systemically, so everything that we do produces the outcomes. Now, I just want to be, I'm looking at my time, but I want to be able to share a little bit more of some of the policies that we've moved forward. First, House Bill, right? More of our students, I can tell you, are facing systems that were not built to welcome their perspective or experience. All of ODE's bills were created and delivered through an equity lens in this legislative session, and we had a lot of support from community members. For example, House Bill 2052 recognizes tribal sovereignty by codifying the inherent right of American Indian and Alaska Native students to wear traditional regalia, tribal regalia, or objects of cultural significance at public events and especially graduations. This proposal recognizes Native American self-determination, self-governance, and decision-making on issues that affect their own people. These proposals will bar any possible, and I'm going to teary-eye, folks, because like, oh my goodness gracious, we have to legislate this. Upon students' right to wear clothing or items of spiritual and culturally significance, especially eagle feathers at graduation. Thank you to Representative Sanchez and Representative and Senator Hansel championed this bill through sessions, and without their support, we could not have gotten unanimous support from both chambers. And tremendous gratitude to our OD staff, April Campbell, Director of Indian Ed, and Ramona Halcom. ODE also introduced House Bill 2056A, which is access to linguistic inclusion. And we have lots of supporters in that. We introduced House Bill 2697, which is the Every Student Belongs, which bans symbols of hate, like the news, the flag of the Confederacy, and neo-Nazi symbology in the entire state. We also have to recognize, and I have to say also, ODE also made a commitment to the LGBTQ2 SIA plus students with Senate Bill 52. This bill codifies the recommendations that were built around the Student Success Plan, and Representative Salinas and Senator Lieber championed this. So our students, our LGBTQ students, can be safe. That's the intention. Also, again, I can go on, but I wanted to just highlight those few bills that were passed through an equity and anti-racist lens that we're very proud of. I also have to say that I also want to highlight House Bill 2166, which establishes Racial Justice Council. 2168, which establishes the Juneteenth as a legal state holiday. 2526, Indigenous People Days in October, celebrating it. 2935, the Create a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. It's called the Crown Act. Prohibits discrimination based on race, color, or national origin in interscholastic activities. Think about that. Think about that. And Senate Bill 398, which creates a crime of intimidation by displaying of the news. 289, bias and hate crimes on public lands. So this is just a breath of the different policies that were passed, also around the language that we use. I just want to highlight a few guidance that we provided to schools that our children during this time of COVID-19, we understand that the disparities that existed before COVID-19 have been amplified, right? And in the now, how is it that the language that we're using is about learning loss, remediation, recovery? And how do we move that instead of saying learning loss is unfinished learning, because our children had some learning within their homes with their abuelitas, with their aunts. So how do we then bring that forward to that unfinished learning? Remediation, right? The language of deficit, moving it to acceleration. How do we create the acceleration in our schools to accelerate the learning for our children? Recovery versus renewal. How do we come together as community based on what we learned? What we learned. The tears we shed for the people we lost. The current times and the times of extremes and the time of the clock of the world. And say, el movimiento, it's about renewal and coming together. We also created a Care and Connection campaign as a gentle reminder about how important it is to create the spaces for the adults in our buildings to connect with our children, and more so than ever, teachers, educators, thank you for what you do every single day. And you're creating those caring spaces and conditions to be able to authentically connect, because we also understand that our children are coming in with trauma. Our adults are coming in with trauma. And how are we not afraid to talk about what's currently happened so we can see it, and then we can actually lean in to be able to heal it? I'm going to read a quote from Margaret Whitley, which she says, "Whatever the problem, community is the answer. How we are together in our relationships is the solution. When people are anxious and scared, we draw from one another. Listening helps us lean in and hold one another. We are in this together. Last year, this couple of years has tested us and took us on a journey we could have never imagined, predicted, or planned for. And despite our best hopes and efforts, we are at one another's critical juncture and curve in the road. We don't quite know what's ahead. Who knows, right? It changes all the time. And as I've said before and will continue to say, how we come together to listen and support one another will set the tone for the experience for our children this school year. We, community members, CBOs, philanthropy, education, systems, student voice, we are the weather makers. And back to what Ocasio-Cortez said, how do we lean in with courageous love? Courageous love, which takes a lot of work. It's not an easy thing. And then, yes, I have to say it takes a village to raise a child. I also have to say that if it's not us, then who? Bringing the voice, of John Lewis. If it's not us, then who? If that's not now, then when? And then I have to finish with el movimiento, el presente, el futuro, nuestros niños. The movement, the present, the future equals our children, our babies. And then again, I have to be able to highlight Dolores Huerta, because this is so meaningful in the now for all of us as comunidad. How do I stop 11 million people from buying the grapes? The question becomes, how do we educate our children about who they are, in the skin that they're in the languages that they speak, their cultural identity, their stories, the stories of their elders, the stories of their communities that look like them. So with this, extremely humbled and full of joy and a lot of tears here that I've been able to contain. And just thank you to the Oregon Community Foundation for inviting me to speak today. So muchísimas gracias.
Carmen, that was so inspiring. Thank you for grounding us en comunidad, en el movimiento, especialmente en este Día de Muertos. Thank you for, especially on this Day of the Dead for us. Thank you for bringing your papi into this conversation in this space. It's everything you've shared has been incredibly moving. I think everyone would agree. Our participants, you're hearing or you're probably seeing in the chat. And now we have a few minutes for a couple of questions. You talked a lot about some examples of what the department has been doing, has been working on. You address racism. One of the questions, I'll start with the chat from Sandra Hernandez. She says, would you please share any ongoing strategies and or plans already in place by OD to work in partnership with CBOs?
So community-based organizations are essential in the work that the Oregon Department does. And we have several student success plan. We have the Latino, Latinx, and indigenous communities from Mexico, Central America, and South America. We have the African American Black Student Success Plan. We have now our LGBTQ. And one of our critical partners are community-based organizations, right? And being able to support them to be able to work with the school districts and the communities to be able to accomplish the goals. Because we also understand that our schools are doing the best work that they're trying to do, and sometimes some of them do not have the capacity to be able to do. So we have to go to our cultural informants. We have to go to our community-based organizations that have the trust, the language, right? The understanding of how to be able to hold space to build that bridge back to the system. And I know many schools are working on their equity, racial equity, and school districts are doing that. And in the meantime, our CBOs plays a crucial aspect. So we are highly encouraging that relationship, but also that relationship in a meaningful way, that our CBOs are the experts. Our community are the experts. Our parents are the experts. Mm-hmm. Create the condition and the spaces for authentic voice to happen so we can then create the best possible conditions, right, to be able to support our schools in this effort. So Oregon Department of Education has a commitment to continue and expanding our work with community-based organizations. That's the short story.
Great, gracias. Along with that, you talked about capacity in response to, supporting school districts and student success. How do we create a space for the voices to be heard in places where we don't have maybe as much access to culturally specific organizations and leaders in education? How do we support? How do we show up? How does the state support that? Like rural communities, for example.
So one of the things that, and I might be able to share those slides, and let me just go that we have 197 school districts. Mm-hmm. We have 19 ESDs, right? And so with that, there are BIPOC and tribal and indigenous students in every single one of our school districts. Let me just say that, period. So with that, part of it, so let me reframe. So the Oregon Department of Education, the legislature set the policy. We set the rules, we create the guidance, we can create suggestions for implementation. And I think that this is a little bit different also coming from Honduras. what the Departamento de Educación, el Ministerio de Educación said, that's what you did, you know? So you would go all around. If you were reading Mi Mamá Me Dijo, Mi Papá, you know, you could find it everywhere in Honduras. Here, and this is, I think, sometimes the tension is that we create the guidance, we can provide, we're the stewards of the resources, we provide them to the school districts, but the school districts have something that's called local control. And part of that local control is that they have boards, right, that are elected officials, and they have one employee, the superintendent, and the superintendent that manages the district. So how do we create authentic voices? And part of the movimiento is that there are spaces that are rich in community-based organizations, rich in community-based organizations that are linguistically and culturally embedded in the communities. And there's almost, I would say, 60% of our districts that are not. So how do we create the capacity and enhance the capacity together? And this is where we can come and link systems, philanthropy, right, and OHA and ODE, and say, who are the CBOs that right now are doing some exemplar practices, and what do they need to then create to be able to then share them out with other communities and be those folks? How do we create the structures of what I would call, I was the executive director of a nonprofit organization. You know, we had promotoras de salud, promotoras de educación. So where and how do we then create a cohort of I don't want to say army, I like that analogy, but a cohort of experts in each community? How do we provide those conditions for every community to have those navigators within their own community tied, you know, to a nonprofit organization? I mean, there's different ways that we can see it, but I feel that part of it is for us to be able to connect and for us to be able to understand what the need is, and that these are services that are absolutely needed. And I think OCF is a model of being able to go to these different communities and understand what's needed. And so how do we come into this conversation with support and help?
Yeah, gracias for that. And one last question for you. As our leader, you know, the deputy director for Oregon Department of Education, you have your own personal experience as you shared your story and your years of experience in education and nonprofit work and more. And let's center our educators in the classroom for a moment, the families and the students. What would you say to them as one thing for them to consider, to think about? As teachers in the classroom, as families listening to you right now, we have familias from different corners of the state. We have Eastern Oregon folks, we have Central Oregon folks, we have Southern Oregon folks, the Northern Willamette Valley, different corners of our states listening to you right now in different sectors as well. What would you say to educators, to families, and to students, if they can take one thing away from your comments today?
I'm going to start with the students.
Yeah.
I think for the students, for the Latino, Latinx students specifically, you are beautiful. Your language is an asset. And anybody that tells you something differently, you should not listen to them. You belong. You show up every single day proud of who you are, because you come from a long thousands of years of traditions and love. That's for our students. For our parents, I would say your voice is important. And sometimes our systems are not designed to listen. They're designed to do a one-way communication. They're not a two-way communication. We want you to do a survey. We want you to come to a focus group. But then how is your voice being honored? And how do you advocate and that every single voice is important, even though some of the covert or very overt messages that the system gives our parents is that their voice is not important. And I have to go back to my mom. She, third grade level of education, ella ahí estaba en la escuela. She was right there every single day, and nobody would tell her anything that she couldn't be. Right? For our teachers, gratitude for everything that you're doing. And if you are a teacher that looks like me, I need to send you love, because I know that in the work that you're trying to do right now in your classrooms to be culturally responsive and to hold space, it's becoming more difficult. And that you belong. And thank you. For our white teachers, I would say thank you. And what are the conditions that you're creating in your classrooms, the messages that you're sending, so our BIPOC, tribal, and indigenous students are seen and feel heard, and that they belong, and that this space was created with them in mind. That this space was created for them in mind, because again, the lens is, who am I in the skin that I'm in, the experiences that I have, right? The relationships, and how do I serve, and in community, and how do I serve the communities that I serve? How do I need to show up? And everybody can answer those questions as an equity lens, but that has a lot. Who are you in the skin that you're in the role that you play, and what conditions are we all creating for every single one of our students to be heard, to feel loved, right? And to be educated. Children cannot learn if they're in cortisol. Children cannot learn if there's racism. Children cannot learn if they don't feel safe. And we have enough evidence and research that tells us that.
Gracias, Carmen. This is, thank you. This has been just tremendous and super inspiring. There's a lot of love for you in the chat. We'll be sure to share all the notes that you're getting and a follow-up. I think a couple more questions are trickling in, but we are at time. We are happy to follow up with you and also share that response with our attendees after Conexiones. Thank you for sharing tu corazón. Thank you for your leadership. We are very lucky to have you as our Deputy Director for Oregon Department of Education. Thank you for joining Conexiones. Y feliz Día de los Muertos.
Gracias, Mirna. One last comment that I want to leave for everybody. Yeah. We are the movimiento. We have to. We have to. In the time of the clock of the world, in the times of experience that we have to be el movimiento, and we have to activate that movimiento. Silence is not an option for us. So thank you.
And with that, as we continue to create este movimiento, this movement through Conexiones today, it's now time for our first break. But before, just thank you to our interpreters that are helping us ensure folks listening in Spanish are able to understand and hear what's happening today at Conexiones. And thank you, everyone, and in advance to all of our presenters and breakout sessions for speaking as slow as you can so that our interpreters have time to catch up. I also am working on that myself. We hope that people enjoyed this moment, and our breakout sessions will open at 10 a.m. We have 2 breakout sessions for folks to join. You can join these sessions by clicking the links in the chat box, which are also available on our website and in the agenda. This will take you to a separate Zoom meeting. You will receive a link to come back to this main session at the end of your breakout session. So you have a few moments right now to get some water, get situated, and click on the session of your choosing, and they will provide the link to come back here for the rest of the program when the sessions are over. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your break and enjoy the session. We will see you back after your sessions. Saludos, Eugene. Greetings, Eugene and Albany. Also, everyone, in the spirit of wealth building and supporting Latino businesses, feel free to drop in the chat your favorite restaurants that you would recommend people to join in places like Southern Oregon, Eastern Oregon, Southern Willamette Valley, so that people can visit and support our comunidad. Feel free to drop it in the chat. Saludos, Albany. All right, well, I think everyone is back. Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed the sessions. We hope you were able to ask questions, get to know our panelists. Huge thank you to our students and everyone for participating. Our interpreters are ready. Thank you for the notes. And thank you to our interpreters. You are doing an incredible job. Thank you so much for your support. People are adding in the chat their favorite businesses, Latino-owned businesses to support restaurants. Keep adding them so people can take note for when they visit different parts of our beautiful state. And now we are excited to be moving into the next part of our program. We will share all things that we learned and reports with you in a follow-up to Conexiones very soon. But now I would like to welcome Sonia Warcell, Oregon Community Foundation's Chief Community Impact Officer, to share a few words with you. Sonia, welcome.
Hola, buenos dias. Thank you so much, Mirna. And I'm having so much fun seeing what's popping up in the chat. And I do hope that we can capture all of this. So when we are all able to be on the road again and visiting each other in our communities, we can have this reference. So as Mirna pointed out, my name is Sonia Warcell, and I'm the Chief Community Impact Officer here at OCF. And I use she, her pronouns. And it's just so wonderful to be here with all of you today. As Chief Community Impact Officer for the Foundation, I have the privilege of overseeing our programs and initiatives around the state that we designed to create impact, positive impact for the state, including the Latino Partnership Program. And I'm just so inspired and humbled to be with all of you today. And I hope that you've enjoyed the last 2 days of rich information sharing and discussion. I want to share my appreciation and thanks for all of the presenters and for all of you for sharing your time and your insights over the last few days. And as you know, we've been exploring 2 themes over the course of the last 2 days, wealth building and education. And we believe that these are key to the future success of our state. And I want to just take a minute to look ahead and share some thoughts with you about directions that we'll be heading as a foundation and as a Latino Partnership Program. Over the coming years, we're going to be focusing on the diversity, the beauty, the needs, and the strengths of Oregon's Latino Latinx community. And to this end, we're going to continue to listen and to learn and to partner with Latinx leaders. We'll do this work across all of OCF's programs and initiatives, with LPP at the center of this work. And I want to share with you that LPP has just recently completed a new strategic plan that we're bringing to our board this week for approval, and that will guide our work in the coming years. And this work is focused in 3 key areas, which I hope will resonate and come as no surprise for you, given the topics the last couple of days. LPP is going to focus on education and wealth building and leadership development. And we're building out in the strategic plan the use of multiple tools in those areas. So this will include grant making, and it will also include convening and community engagement, research, and public policy and advocacy. I'm just so excited about this next iteration for LPP and for Mirna and Rosillo's role in moving the work forward. And I hope that many of you will join us in these efforts as we forge ahead. So once again, I just want to thank everybody for participating, to all of our partners and panelists for sharing their time and their knowledge and personal stories, and a very special thank you to the students who shared with us this morning. And I want to share my deepest gratitude to Rocio Perez and Mirna Lorelli Cibrian for organizing this incredibly valuable event and for their vision and dedication for LPP. Remember, Conexiones is a biannual event, so we hope to see you in person in 2023. And if you have any questions or just want to connect after this event, please feel free to reach out at any time to Mirna or to Rocio or to me. We're just so happy to keep these connections and conversations going.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rocio Perez. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. And I am happy to serve as the coordinator for the Latino Partnership Program. Gracias. Thank you so much for joining these last 2 days, and we hope to see you at the next Conexiones Summit. Gracias.